Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good morning, everyone. Real quick, I had a lengthy conversation with Ed Blank yesterday. He's in really good spirits. He's doing well. He found a doctor down in Washington, PA that specializes in shingles that's going to help him to get over this. So he says he's going to start driving next week, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks he'll be back at the meeting with us. So that's the update on Ed Blank. So it all sounds good. Anyway, I am really honored to have this speaker here today. We've had her here before. She's going to talk about some of the legislative things that are going on in Harrisburg. She represents most of us that are here in this room, in this district. Like I said, she'll update us. She's here with a shadow, as she calls it, Cassie Smith. I want to get you in there too. She's going into your junior year, is that correct? Down at Washington and Jefferson University. Anyway, I'm not going to take much more time, so I can leave it all to this young lady, Valerie Gaydos.
Thanks, Mark. And it's always good to be back. Although, you know, it's interesting when he said that the first president or first leader of Iceland was a woman. It's kind of funny because I always think of Margaret Thatcher as the first leader of, because she was kind of a global leader, even though maybe she didn't really hold the position of, I mean, it was prime minister. Golda Meir. Oh, Golda Meir, right. That's right, right. So it's kind of interesting.
We're going to have to start doing a fact check on Ken.
So, but yeah, Margaret Thatcher certainly was quite the powerhouse, at least for me growing up during the Reagan administration, and you know, all the stuff that went on in the world. So that's kind of an interesting. I'm going to go back and look all that, but thank you for picking that up. So I'm Valerie Gaydos, state representative for the 44th district, which includes all of Quaker Valley, and now it includes all of Quaker Valley, including Lead and Leedsdale, which used to be part of the other district that went into Beaver County. So one of the things that I helped put together is make sure that all of Quaker Valley went into a single House district, single Senate district, and single congressional district. Represent Moon Township and also Findlay and North Fayette, which is the school district of West Allegheny. So everyone always asks me, like, the last thing that we did in Harrisburg, budget. We just passed the budget, and I voted yes for the budget. I can tell you it spends too much. I was always brought up that, you know, you be frugal, but it actually spent on a lot of things to catch us up from COVID in 2020. But that doesn't mean that we should continue to spend that money, because one of the things in the budget that I found pretty disturbing is that it had included recurring revenue, or excuse me, recurring expenses. It wasn't like just one-off expenses. So that means next year, something has got to get cut. we've got to be frugal, or there's going to be a massive tax increase. So I struggled with that because, you know, when you have one-time expenses to try to recover from something, and we've all done that in our life, but then the following year you say, all right, what are we going to now need to cut? So I think next year there's going to be some really serious decisions to be made. And if not cutting, then how are we going to make Pennsylvania a better, more productive state? I just had a hearing yesterday on association health plans. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, you were able to do an association health plan. So small businesses were able to pool, like go to the Chamber of Commerce and have their health care as pooled and be affordable. Well, that was made prohibitive after the Affordable Care Act. So I have a bill that is House Bill 555 that will bring those association health plans back. So like if you're a small medical practice or if you're a business that has less than 50 employees, right now you don't have a choice. You are actually, it's just incredibly prohibitive, the cost of healthcare. And so if we can bring association health plans back, which 36 other states allow that to happen, you can be a veterinarian, a chiropractor, an accounting firm, anybody that has less than 50 employees. We just heard from life science companies. We've heard from restaurants. That would enable them to pool. And in fact, if we had passed my bill in 2019, all of our restaurants would not have had the problem they had during COVID when they let all of these people off because a lot of them weren't full-time employees, but those that were, they did not have really adequate healthcare coverage. And that was a real problem in the restaurant industry. So if we had passed my bill in 2019, it wouldn't have been as big of a problem. So legislatively, a couple of things I'm working on. And I'll tell you a couple of things, then I'm going to take the questions, because I want to make sure that I address the stuff you're interested in. The other piece of legislation that I've put together is something we're creating a landslide insurance fund. Because right now, Western Pennsylvania is the home of massive landslides, as we all see here in Quaker Valley, also in Shaler and other parts of mostly northern Allegheny County, and also like there's some areas that it's just, we've been blessed with the type of geology that gives us oil and gas, but that same geology is giving us landslides because of the red beds and the shale. So what this particular bill does, and I teamed up with Representative Emily Kincaid, a Democrat on the other side of Pittsburgh, and we created something that would be a fund within, we started to do it within DEP, but DEP didn't want it, which is like, they didn't want to do more work, which we kind of joked about like that, and I think as Representative Kincaid said, that they didn't have a reason why, really. So we got it passed through the Environmental Committee, and it is hopefully on the House floor. And what it would do is it would help both municipalities and individuals in the case of catastrophic loss from landslides, that at least there would be some coverage to get you back into your home and to help. And it would be both grants and also low interest loans. Right now we have something called the Mine Subsidence Fund that was started in the 1950s. We were hoping to combine it with the Mine Subsidence Fund, because the Mine Subsidence Fund actually has some money still left in it, because there's that problem kind of has been alleviated for the most part, which was really huge in the 50s because we didn't know where a lot of coal mines were dug, and people were building homes and other things on top of that. So hopefully we can get that passed through the House shortly, and then it would be on to the Senate. Another piece of legislation which regards into property taxes. Property taxes are huge. And not only are they huge, the issue's huge, but also the property taxes keep going up, 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 up. And we all know that here in Allegheny County that we're looking at a potential countywide reassessment. Because there was the whole issue of, is this taxation method that we're doing fair when they have they calculate when you move into your home. And so what was absolutely amazing, and there was a bill that Representative Innamorato, before she became county executive, she put a bill when she was my colleague in the House that enabled residents in the city of Pittsburgh to have their property taxes abated if they were longtime owner occupants. And I said, well, no, that's not fair. If they're going to allow city residents and city seniors to get their taxes abated, then how about us here in the suburbs? And you have to offer it all throughout the county. And so that bill did pass the House. I voted no. And we recently had a bill that came back from the Senate that did the exact same thing. It created what was called a longtime owner occupant property tax relief, blah, 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 you know. And what it would do is it would say that people who live in the city and they've been there a long time, it would counteract the areas that were massive growth where, of course, we all know that when you sell your house, the new person that comes in, all of a sudden they get their taxes reassessed at the rate in which they purchased the house. So in some ways, a lot of seniors have their taxes lower already, but when you sell that house, the new owner all of a sudden gets hit with the higher property tax. So if you've owned your property for 20, 30 years or more, you are going to have lower property taxes to begin with. So what this bill did is it came over, and I said, no, we tried to, Representative McCurry and I tried to amend the bill to say if you're going to offer it to city residents, you got to offer it to the seniors in our suburbs here. And the majority party wiped out all the amendments, and I said I was steaming mad because I said I am not voting for this, and people need to understand that that's unfair and it's unconstitutional. Not that I don't want seniors, you know, in the city of Pittsburgh to have a tax break, but if they're going to offer it to the city of Pittsburgh, we're going to offer it to people here, because ultimately when the city of Pittsburgh's not paying the taxes, who's going to pay them? We out here. And I said, no, absolutely not. So those are the kind of things that I have been aggressively fighting. The next bill that I worked with Representative Jessica Benham, she's a Democrat on the other side of Pittsburgh as well, the pharmacy benefit manager legislation. And the challenge that, I don't know if you deal much with what pharmacy benefit managers are, they call PBMs. PBMs are third-party administrators to your insurance plan. So when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, let me check to see if it's covered, I got to get pre-authorization, it's typically a third-party middleman that are MBAs, people like not making medical decisions, but they are making decisions on the cost of medication. And PBMs came around almost 50 years ago to make sure that prices were fair and that they were doing a good job at managing medication, whether it be prescription drugs or generics. Well, over the last 50 years, they've been doing things like, well, first of all, 3 PBMs now control 80% of the market, and that's not free market. And what it's doing is it's driving the cost up, not driving the cost down. So what this piece of legislation that we worked on did is it made it more transparent. It made some practices prohibited, so like patient steering, so all of a sudden you can't have somebody say to you, you now have to buy your stuff through mail order when you want to go to your pharmacist who you trust and you have got a great relationship, he knows your other medications, and so it prohibits that type of activity. So it opens up to the free market to make sure that prices stay low and that you are still offered the prescription pricing at what is affordable. In 2019, I actually passed a bill that lifted what was called the gag order on pharmacists, because your pharmacist was actually not allowed to tell you that you can get your prescription drug cheaper if you pay cash. So let's say if your copay was $20 or $15 and you went in to get blood pressure medicine, which is typically really cheap, it's like $2. So he or she, your pharmacist, was not allowed to tell you that just pay cash $2. And what the bill that I did in 2019 said that nope, your pharmacist was allowed to tell you. Because sometimes if you ever, before 2019, sometimes your pharmacist would say to you, oh, I found a rebate or I found a coupon. Well, he was basically saying that to cover his tracks, that even though he took your credit card and your insurance information, he probably just didn't bother to submit it and then just, oh, it's $2, I'll take your cash. Because he or she does not make money by lying to you. So So that was passed in 2019, but I'm pleased that this particular bill that we did to create more transparency and to study the pharmacy prices passed both the House and the Senate, and a couple weeks ago the governor signed it. So I'm really pleased to report that hopefully over the next couple of months when these studies take place, that we will figure out how to even manage those prescription drugs even more efficiently. And those are the kind of things that I like to focus on. I have a bill that reduces or eliminates the inheritance tax. Pennsylvania has one of the highest inheritance taxes in the nation. And it's particularly high when it's lateral to your sibling. And that's a huge problem. And what we're seeing is a lot of people moving to Florida, getting an apartment in Florida, giving their house to their children for $1, still living with their children, but then getting an apartment in Florida so that they technically live in Florida. And I think when we've seen other states that those who actually lower taxes, they get just as much tax revenue coming in, because when the taxes go higher, what does everyone do? They figure out how to not pay taxes. So that's something that I think that as a legislator and as a state legislator we should be working on, is how to reduce people's taxes and how to be more efficient and transparent with people's money. I've always said that people don't mind paying taxes, they just want to know what they're used for. They want to see that it's going to the roads and bridges. That's the one thing that people are really, really angry about, is that paying the gas tax, because they're saying, well, that gas tax was supposed to fix roads and bridges. Where are roads and bridges getting fixed? And when we saw this stuff happen in Pittsburgh, when that bridge collapsed, you're thinking, wait a minute, we've been paying this gas tax that is supposed to be fixing these things. So making sure that they use that money properly is one of the roles that I have as a state house member. Let me just take to questions here. Because I can go on and talk about different topics, but let's make sure I'm answering your questions.
Yeah, the mainstream media pretty well christened Shapiro as the Democrats' next VP candidate. I want to know, you have to work with him. They say that he works across the aisle. He's helped with school choice, helped loosen up some of the requirements for licensing, and yet they say everyone loves him. Is that true? What's it like to work with him?
So yeah, that's a great question. What's it like to work with Governor Shapiro? I have to say that as a human being and as a person, he is way better than Governor Wolf. At least I can.
Low bar.
You can carry on a conversation with him. Now, it is very disappointing that he had committed to school choice. He's committed to a number of other things which is why a lot of people elected him. And of course, the challenge in the last election was, the choices were pretty drastic. And so he made a lot of commitments that he did not follow through with. So when you're talking about bipartisan, yeah, he made a lot of commitments that were bipartisan. We have yet to see him follow through. In fact, he had vetoed a bill that he had committed to supporting, which was the Lifeline scholarships in Philadelphia. My view was, why it was only a couple $1 million to go to Philadelphia schools to allow some people via lottery to get out of Philadelphia schools. Some people said, well, but it wasn't enough money. And I said, well, what's it hurt then if you're going to throw a couple $1 million to see if it works? And I said, what are you guys afraid of? Are you afraid that for a couple $1 million, it's going to show that our school systems are failing? And in fact, what's interesting is that it is shown that the more money we've thrown at schools, the lower test scores are going down. So it's not working. It's not working. So what's he like to work with? Well, we did the PBM legislation, and I have to say that it was a little frustrating that during the press conference, we did a press conference up in Newcastle, and we had both Republicans and Democrats. I was right there when he talked about the bill, which he signed. And I thank the governor for signing it, because it was truly bipartisan, bicameral. We had Senator Brooks and myself and Representative Benham and pharmacists. There was no politics at that press conference. But of course, it was right after they had announced that he was being considered. And I was very frustrated because I thought it detracted from our pharmacists, the story, because there was a lot of questions from the press, shame on them. And we were talking about pharmacy, PBM stuff, and then 10 minutes went off talking about the campaign stuff. And I was very, very frustrated with that, because here I am standing right there, and he's talking about his agenda and what he's supporting, and it probably is an ethics violation, because that's state resources to do a press conference, and now 10 minutes of it was gone in politics. Sometimes you can't help that, so I would be a little tolerant with that. But what's he like to work with? As I said, he's a decent human being, and you can have a conversation, but he's gone back on his word a number of times since he got elected.
Thank you.
Valerie, I have several questions. The first one's about electric vehicles. I read an article where they said they were going to charge people that have full electric $250 extra, and anybody with hybrid $50 a year. Is that true?
I don't know the exact dollar amounts off my head. That sounds about right. And the thought behind that is that electric vehicles are actually heavier because of their batteries. And while I don't believe in, I try to vote against any increase in taxes on anybody, that particular situation is that they have really heavy batteries, and they are actually heavier than gas-powered cars, and they do just as much pressure on the road. So yes, there is an increase in electrical vehicles.
Now, my second question is, these lottery machines, these things that we see in bars and supermarkets, games of chance. Now, they want to start charging a fee or anything on that, because the gaming industry is lobbying hard that they want to put a fee on it. Is that in the legislation?
They are pushing to put fee on it, and there's difference between games of skill and games of chance, and that's the difference, is trying to argue that are they skill or are they chance. And what's interesting, I just read an article about pinball machines. I actually did not know that pinball machines were confiscated and in the 20s or 30s, very much like alcohol was, because the early pinball machines did not have the flippers, and that they were pin machines, so they were considered games of chance. But when you added flippers, they became games of skill. So that's kind of where we are with those things. And
Okay.
we'll see how that they adapt to that industry to say that you're allowed to do games of skill.
Now, my final question is, term limits has been in the news lately, okay? I read, now, the Constitution says we have to have a minimum being elected, be it House of Representatives, President, and Senators. Several states, and I recall North Dakota, is trying to pass legislation to put age limits on their people going to Congress. Has any of this come up in Pennsylvania?
You know, it always comes up. People always ask, they said, are you for term limits? And my answer is, yes, I am. It's called Election Day. And what we need to do is get people more engaged, not create these rules, because, look, we have some 90-year-olds who are way better, you know, physically and mentally than, as I point to Warren, than we have people who are younger. So I kind of find discrimination based on age or any of that stuff, it's sort of a false threshold. But term limits. So I spent time, when I got out of college, I spent a couple years where I was a staff person to State Senator Mike Fisher before I came to my senses the first time, and then left, ran my own business for 25 years. But it was a great experience. But here's the thing. Term limits, unless they apply to staff and lobbyists and bureaucrats, you're actually taking your power away, because unless they take the power away from bureaucrats, you know, and let me give you an example. When I first got elected, one of my colleagues he had supported term limits. And I came in one day and someone said, hey, Representative so-and-so amended your bill in committee. And I was like, wait, he amended my bill, never even talked to me, which is like the courtesy to say, hey, look, talk to me first. Well, I approached him and I said, hey, Jim, why'd you amend my bill? And now we've only been House members for 30 days. And he said, well, I don't know. I walked in and the executive director handed me the amendment and said, here, amend this. And I said, and you did? And he said, well, and I said, Jim, you believe in term limits, but here you have an executive director that just told you how to vote, how to do, that's wrong. I said, you represent your district. You work for your district. You don't work for leadership. You don't work for anyone else other than the people you represent. And he said, I was just hoping that no one would ask me any questions. Okay, I said, you're the main spokesman for term limits, and I said, this is exactly the problem with term limits, is that now the staff and lobbyists are in control. So when I worked for State Senator Mike Fisher, now fast forward, I went into the private sector for 25 years, was running a company before I came home to take care of my mom who had Parkinson's. And so I run, I win, and guess who I see as executive directors? The kids of the people who I worked with 25 years before that, or the kids of lobbyists, or the kids of, and so, sometimes when we put legislation in to get drafted, sometimes there are times that I will call a separate lawyer outside of the building, even though we have something called Legislative Reference Bureau, because if I go and put something that leadership doesn't like, they see all the requests for legislation, and there are times I've even put in a request for legislation not telling anybody, and all of a sudden I get a call from a lobbyist, and I was like, wait a minute, who told you that I did that? So, we struggle with that internally, and so that's why I'm not for term limits, because, and people will say like, well, we need to do something, and I agree, but I am only for term limits if it includes staff, lobbyists, and bureaucrats. So that's my answer on that.
What is a
Actually,
bureaucrat?
Actually, you had a question here.
No, I was going to ask about the vehicles and
Oh, okay.
the taxes on cars. Thank you.
You talk about lobbyists and bureaucrats. What is a bureaucrat?
I think a perfect example would be somebody like an Anthony Fauci, because he had been there his entire career. So what happens is that somebody who is in these departments, who they've had 30 years to build a network, right? They've had interns that might be in there, so they have way more control, and like me stating that like I submitted something to get legislation. Well, somebody in there in that office, whether it's a secretary or an assistant, and remember, look, they all have jobs too. And if you're in Harrisburg, that's where people get employed. So just the odds of having somebody related to somebody else who works in Harrisburg because they live there. I mean, that's just, it's like Washington, D.C. There's a lot of proposals that say that Washington, D.C. should be split up so that, like, let's say the Department of Agriculture should be in Kansas. You should put, like, the Department of Justice, in another state. You should put, so that you're really spreading it around and that it's not so concentrated of the power of the people who run these departments. And they're basically unelected people who control most of the stuff. Because, look, when you boot a legislator out of office, where do you think their staff goes? They just go to the next guy, or the next, or they go, to, so.
Is it on? Yeah. Good. You were talking about not wanting to increase taxes. So I would like you to say where you think some of the inefficiencies in government, where we're spending money that we could probably cut it.
So the inefficiencies. So for example, I was a sponsor of a bill that did audits. So it would require every single department or agency, whether it's the Department of Health, Department of Revenue, to do audits. It would address overpayments and underpayments. So that right there is a really huge issue of underpayments and overpayments. And it's just a matter of efficiency. It's not cutting people's programs. It's taking a microscope, like any of us do in our private sector businesses. Now, I ran small startups companies, so we had to squeeze the juice out of every single corner. And in some ways, government is not efficient. In fact, in the hearing yesterday, what was stated by multiple testifiers is that the reality is the Affordable Care Act has nothing, there's nothing affordable about it. And what happens is that there is proof that the more government bureaucracy gets involved, costs of everything goes up. Now, I would argue that in some degree, when you're using public money, yeah, you have to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to bid and things like that. It's not like a private sector. So, when people say you got to run the public sector like the private sector, yeah, there are things that have to be different. I agree. But cutting wasteful spending on overpayments and underpayments, like for example, Department of Labor. Department of Labor during COVID was an absolute mess. They were writing checks left and right to people who didn't even file for unemployment. There were people who came into my office saying, I just got this $22,000 check, and I'm employed, I didn't even ask for it. That was huge. That was a big problem, and we don't even know how that occurred, whether someone typed the wrong Social Security number, and they're still trying to fight back to get some of that money back, and here are people who went and spent it. Good luck. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that is such low-hanging fruit. It's not picking out a program and saying, cut you, cut you, cut you, versus somebody else. It's, let's create more efficiency, and I actually have a bill to do that.
Valerie, I want to get back to that bureaucrats. Now, are some of these people covered by the Civil Service Act?
I think some of them are.
Now,
Yeah.
let's say your staff, they're not civil service.
So the civil service is more the federal side, but on the state, they are state employees. So my employees, I have a secretary in Harrisburg that I share with another House member. In fact, my coworker and my House member colleague is a guy named Tim Twardzik. Tim's mom is Mrs. T's Pierogies. He's from the Sewickley County, so which is great because we get pierogies all the time.
My question is this now. Let's say when you leave, now, can your staff stay there for the next person? Are they protected under civil service in the state of Pennsylvania?
So they go back into the job pool, and then they have to apply to whoever else.
Yeah, because civil servants, they are protected under the
Yeah.
laws because it eliminates the
Harrisburg's a
spoil,
little different.
the spoil system.
Yep.
Now, how do you control these lobbyists? They they retire from being a representative of state. How many years do they have to stay out of it before they become a lobbyist?
Right now, it is, I believe it's 1 year. It's 1 year. It's 1 year, but there's nothing keeping a state legislator that retires to go to a firm. You just can't lobby the body which you came from. So let's say, if I'm in the House right now, then the person who retires from the House can lobby the Senate, but they can't lobby the House, and vice versa.
Hello, I've got a question for you.
Okay?
Something I'm very concerned about.
We're in an
Election cycle. What is the pushback about having a real ID? That citizens vote, only citizens. I'm very afraid of what's going to happen this election cycle. They're already allowed to vote in some local elections, non-citizens.
Yeah, here's what I was.
What's the pushback? Well, I mean, what's the argument against it?
The argument is that some people don't have IDs, and I don't, look, you have to have an ID to drive a car. You have to have an ID to almost do everything. In fact, one of my colleagues spent almost 45 minutes reading the entire list of everything you need an ID for. And so, yeah, I'm not even sure because it almost doesn't make sense. I don't know. I've heard every argument under the sun, which to me is absolutely ridiculous.
Is the Pennsylvania legislature trying to enact something like that?
Yes, so the Senate is controlled by Republicans, and the House is controlled by Democrats by one vote. So he who has the majority, now it's she, Representative McClinton from Philadelphia. And this is where look, I've said that this is Western Pennsylvania from Eastern Pennsylvania. I don't care. I work with Emily Kincaid, I work with Anita Kulik, I work with all the, Democrat surrounding legislators in this area. Why? Because we represent this area. And sometimes it is Western Pennsylvania versus Eastern Pennsylvania, as frankly, Western Pennsylvania puts more money into the general fund than Eastern Pennsylvania does. And that's why my job, I believe, 99% of my job is to bring your tax dollars back to the community. And I'm certainly proud to say that I've brought almost $90 million back to the 44th district, which is a record amount. And I can tell you that it's just having run startup companies, I look under every single rock, whether it's a $5,000 grant or something that is made available to digitize records, or something that is a couple $1 million for what we have in this area. And I just make sure all of our municipalities know that it exists. I mean, that's what I spend my time on, is combing through the state government, DCED. That's where a lot of those grants are. And the thing is that it's almost like if you don't, and our communities don't put our hand in the pot to try to get it, it's going to go somewhere else because it already exists. So I try not to vote for additional programs because we already have so much money coming into the state. And I just think that we need to be much more frugal. But if it's there, I'm going to make sure our community gets it.
Okay, I keep hearing the same thing over and over again on the news, all right? You have these criminals. Constantly, they're out of jail before the paperwork's done. Okay, and there's two parts of this, okay? Either they don't have enough jails for them, okay, or the other thing is with a weapon. Okay, I hear this all the time. So-and-so was caught with a pistol. He was robbing a bank. He's 19. In Pennsylvania, you can't own a pistol at 19. All right, why are they not prosecuted?
Thank you very much for that question. That's exactly why we do not need additional laws. We need to enforce the laws we already have.
And they're not doing it.
Amen.
And they're not doing that. That's my biggest beef with all of this legislation that keeps coming back. The one thing that needs to get resolved is exactly that, is that a lot of the sheriffs and the law enforcement, in a way, like that flexibility to plea these people out, because in some cases that person is giving up someone higher, and they'll say, okay, we'll drop that gun charge if and we're not always going to know that. And frankly, I would love to believe that our judges can say, okay, that one, he's not going to go kill a family of whatever. That one, okay, this is worth trading for. I would like to believe that our judges have good discretion. But I will tell you that in Philadelphia, not so much. We've got a DA in Philadelphia that is just letting everybody off for everything. And I can't explain it. I've gotten gavelled several times. And gavel means yelled at on the House floor when I stand up and bring that up, because you're not supposed to malign any particular position by name. But I say, why are we doing these new pieces of legislation when we've got a DA in Philadelphia who will not enforce the stuff we already have? So I'm with you on that, and I've been actively fighting for that.
That's a huge problem.
But I have to say that our DA is better than the Philadelphia DA. So.
You talked a little bit about the funding, or the proposed funding for school choice. There's also, it sounds like, big increases coming to regular public education through the state. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening there and kind of where that's going to go?
Yeah, like I said, it frustrates me tremendously that the more money we take to education, the lower our test scores are going. A couple years ago, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania had decided that our funding formula was unfair because, one, it relies on the property taxes of the local, and they're looking at a better way to do this. The sad thing is that here the courts decided that, oh, it's unconstitutional, unfair. Here you go. Well, can you tell us how, and can you tell us why, and can we come up? And I'm very disappointed that Governor Shapiro's education secretary has not, it's been, what, 2.5 years, and they haven't tackled. To me, that should have been the #1 thing because it is the #1 expense that we are paying. #2, actually, with Health and Human Services. But yeah, it's huge. It's a huge problem. So yes, I voted for the budget. We actually had record amount come to Quaker Valley, West Allegheny, and Moon Township. And but the logic behind this funding was absolutely insane. What we understood was the calculation is that the school districts that taxed too much got more money from the state so that they could make sure that they don't tax you again. And then all of a sudden we got, and I live in Quaker Valley, so all of a sudden Quaker Valley, a week before the budget was passed, did a 2.9% increase in, the tax, local taxes. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, they got that in onto the wire, but, they've also committed to charge the 2.9% every year till the cows come home. So I didn't understand why Quaker Valley would get, as much in this funding formula, but you know what? I represent this district, and I voted for it. So it's an issue. Basic education funding was increased dramatically. Special ed was also, but I also do think, and I'm hearing more and more, that parents are getting very, very frustrated at the amount of money that, look, we want to take care of our special needs kids, but it's almost now becoming an attraction to bring more special needs kids, which then kind of creates this cycle where then Quaker Valley needs more and more money. And when I hear stories of classrooms getting disrupted, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And teachers should be there to teach, not be babysitters. And when we start having to have, home health aides and all that stuff in our classrooms, we need to reconfigure this. We need to reconfigure this. This is a reality, and nobody wants to say that. And I know people say, oh, Valerie, don't say that, but it's a real problem. When I had a kid come to me and say, she's there with her mom talking about why we need more money in the school system, and the young gal said, well, I was very thankful to Miss Jones because, when Robbie had a meltdown and was punching other kids and spitting and blah, 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 we were all scared. And we all were huddled in the corner, and we were so glad Mrs. Jones helped us. And I was like, wow, that's a problem. That's a problem. And that needs to be addressed. So.
Albert, a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, shut down that Chevron case. That they're giving more authority. The agencies have more authority to pass regulations. Now they're pushing it to the judiciary. Now, do you think that the people there in courts...
It gave bureaucrats less authority.
Less authority.
Yeah.
But then they gave that authority to make the judges to make decisions. How can you judge his expertise in a particular field? How are they going to handle that?
That's where you bring in experts. And honestly, I always tell people that to some degree, we do need lobbyists. And not all lobbyists are bad. And here's why, is that if I try to have as many resources in the district as I know, but I also want to reach out to see how things affect other parts of the state. Because as a legislator, I'm also, particularly on a committee, I am responsible for the statewide stuff, for the stuff that I'm on the committee. So lobbyists are really helpful. But if I'm going to be talking about, things that affect senior men, well, you better believe I'm going to call Mark, all right? But there are other things that I might need help on that is engineering related, that's not my background. I'm not, my background is not in the judicial space. my background's in startups, taxes, business, and actually arguably healthcare, because my late husband passed away from cancer. I lost a brother to cancer, and I lost my mom to Parkinson's. So I had a lot of, experience in that space. But on issues that I might not, be aware of, you need people to reach out. So with the Chevron case, and I have not read the entire case, just the summary stuff, but it goes back to what I said about bureaucrats. I really do think, and someone said to me, maybe it's now 15, 20 years ago, when I was concerned about something in politics, and he said to me, Valerie, there are a lot of people, like, everyone might be fighting in politics, and what appears on television is one thing, but you know what, there are really serious people behind the scenes that really do make sure things run pretty smoothly. And he said, when things get really tough, there's always going to be someone that's going to step in. And I believe that Chevron decision was a perfect example of that, is where we had, maybe they're bureaucrats, come in and say that, look, we have to be really worried about unaccountable people having too much power. And so, in a way, it is better that it goes into our elected officials, because guess why? Because we can unelect them, but you can't unelect bureaucrats. And so that's a double-edged sword, where we need to make elected officials more accountable. And that Chevron case kind of does that.
What committees are you on, Valerie?
So I am on government oversight. And unfortunately, government oversight has not yet met under this new House administration. But I'm on commerce, liquor, and professional licensure. And I'm the secretary of the liquor committee. So we just recently passed legislation that would allow RTDs, ready to drink. So like if you've ever bought a White Claw, there's two forms of White Claw. One is made of malt, and then you can buy that at your beer distributor. But then you've got White Claw that's with vodka. You can only buy that in a liquor store. And then there's stuff like High Noon, which a lot of people might know. High Noon, that's also vodka. And beer distributors can't distribute it, even though it's in a can. That's kind of feel like, well, why can't I? It's a can. I get cans at the beer distributor. Well, ready to drink RTDs have liquor in them. And so what they allowed is that limited licenses to beer distributors to be able to sell ready to drink in the can.
What is the status of the state liquor stores? I know at one time they looked at selling them all to private industry.
So yeah, there was a huge push for that. The reality is that the liquor stores bring way too much revenue in, and no one's willing to let that go. And it was interesting at one of the hearings that when they were talking about that, how much revenue brings in, and well, if we're gonna privatize the liquor stores, where is the state gonna get the money from? And my comment was, it sounds to me that the state has an alcohol problem.
Valerie, I understand the state collected massive amounts of COVID money, which created a nice surplus in the state. What is our surplus now?
Yeah, we have several million in the surplus. I don't want to quote the number wrong, but that initially the state House Democrats wanted to spend everything, and the governor did not. And so it was kind of ended up somewhere in between. And so yes, there still is a state surplus. It's not huge. There's still some money in the rainy day fund, which we feel, that's another reason why I voted for the budget, because I felt that that was a fair compromise by both the House and the governor, that, okay, we didn't spend all of it.
Yes, could you expand a little bit what you referred to earlier in terms of the process of eliminating inheritance taxes in the state?
Pretty much is that Pennsylvania has the highest inheritance tax, and I have a proposal to eliminate it totally, because I figure that if we ever got it to the table, we can figure out, reducing it. And like I said, laterally is the highest, so a sibling, and we've got people who, I had a gal who came to my office who her sister lives in California, who actually, believe it or not, has lower inheritance tax, if, you know, for a sibling. And so her sibling passed away. Well, she had given her sibling some money, so it was her money in California, and now when her sibling passed away, she's like, well, but that was mine. I said, you're being taxed. So there is legislation, or actually there was a bill passed a while ago that raised the threshold for small businesses. So let's say you own a pizza shop with your brother or car mechanic or something small, that I think the threshold is something like I think it's now $300,000. I think that threshold should be raised to $1 million or something, so that if you own a company with your sibling, you're not having to pay taxes on your own company. I think that's a real crusher for small business, and I think that's a huge priority in my book.
What about on personal estates?
Correct.
Same thing.
Same thing.
What is the tax?
It is now for siblings. It is 5 point something. 5 point. What is it? 5.2.
It's 5%.
Yeah, it's like 5.1 or 5.2, I think, for siblings. And then as it's your spouse is 0, and then for any other like relative, it's still the highest in the nation.
But is this bill in process today?
The bill is in process, but I have not gotten traction for it because sadly, like the liquor stores,
Too much money.
inheritance tax brings in too much money. So we love to tax, seniors, and it's just terrible.
Because Pennsylvania is, I believe, only one of 6 states that have an inheritance tax.
No, they all have, yes, there are some, a state inheritance tax,
State,
correct.
6 states.
6, it's one of 6, but we are also the highest of all those 6.
So New Jersey.
I just apologize, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
New Jersey doesn't have an inheritance tax anymore. How about New York, Maryland, the states that surround us?
It's been a while since I'll get you all that information. It's been a while since I introduced that bill last year and was really fighting for that, and it's been very frustrating because both parties don't want to give up that. So, when both parties are against it, it's really hard to get passed. But this last budget also increased the NOL, net operating loss carried forward, both in amount of time and dollar amount, and that also will help small startup companies when establishing a business. So that was a tax that they gave up, and that was in there, so that was a little bit.
Okay, best for last, I think. Abortion.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks to me like there's a good chance that the Republicans will not win because of that bill alone.
What bill?
Abortion. They want to,
What bill?
for abortion,
Yeah, what bill are you talking about?
No,
This-
what I'm
this is-
talking about is right now, they want the states to have control over it, which I agree with, all right? But according to when you listen to the news media,
There we go, that's the
all
problem.
you hear. That's all you hear.
I know, and they're wrong.
I understand that.
I know.
And what are you guys doing to try to correct this?
We try, but I cannot get any coverage on media. They don't listen. They don't cover us. In fact, when I did the PBM bill, we had a press conference. It's my bill, and it's Jessica Benham's bill. And Representative Congressman comes in. He starts talking, not even about the bill. He's talking about Infrastructure Act, and it was hijacked, and the media was like, ooh, shiny object, right? Never even talked about the bill for the PBM.
It's exactly right.
So talking about abortion, the reason why I asked that question, what bill you're talking about, because there was a bill that was Senate Bill 106 that was introduced that they're saying that they wanted to ban abortions totally. No, the bill did exactly what Ohio did, which was take it to referendum. So it's an absolute lie on any of those mail pieces and stuff that, no, I think let's get it off the table. It was 1989, this Pennsylvania abortion law was made. It was agreed to with Bob Casey when he was governor, both sides of the aisle, and it's 26 weeks. I don't think there's anybody that has any intention to change the current law, which is, right now it's 26 weeks with the exceptions of rape, incest. There are some things like parental consent in Pennsylvania that is a little more strict than maybe some other states. But for the most part, there is no intention of changing, and that's just...
That's my whole point. I don't know how you're going to...
I think just talk to your friends and tell them it's a lie.
That's the point, because all you hear on the news media,
Well,
Republicans are all against
But what was the
every
old
single-
saying in Rome? Give them circuses, right?
Yep.
Okay, as long as everyone is paying attention to what the news says, whether it's abortion, guns, whatever, all the social issues that they want to pit us against each other, both parties are robbing the bank. So I'm trying to make sure
I think
there's
you
no
understand where I'm
circuses.
coming from, too, because you see it every day, every single day.
I see it every day, and I see
know.
all the mail pieces that basically lie. We have more cease and desist letters against, and this is both parties, and okay, so you bring up a really good issue here that is a big pet peeve of mine, and I've tried to introduce legislation that said that in any election, when someone is caught lying, there should be some sort of fine or punishment, okay?
Good luck with that.
We wouldn't
have to pay any tax.
You're right, it's like the cookie jar, right?
That's a good idea. We wouldn't have to pay any tax.
Money goes into the general fund, right? Every time. So I've tried to introduce that legislation, but I will tell you, both sides want to lie. So, and that's why it's up to us that's why I do these meetings, because you know what? It's up to the community. How do we prevent election fraud? How do we present, you know what? You know the people in your community, and when they come to the poll, you know who they are. It's kind of like the old days. You know exactly who's in your community. Unfortunately, we have so much, transient people moving in, moving out, moving in, moving out, that it is really hard, but we need to go back to that and knowing our community, knowing our neighbor. Invite your neighbor over for coffee, invite your neighbor over for wine, get to know them. And I say that unfortunately, throughout the 90s, all of these housing developments were built without a clubhouse, and they were built without sidewalks, and they were built without, center of town, and that has drawn us apart, and we need to make sure that we all get together. Whether we agree or disagree, I was telling someone the other day that in college, I had friends who were all over the map. You criticize the idea, not the person. You can criticize the idea, not the person, and when it starts to get to be personal attacks, it's offensive. But with this legislation, as I said, I have several cease and desist letters, and then you got to look at the footnotes. This is the funny thing. They'll say, Valerie did this, right? And then the footnote goes to something which is not even a footnote. Because they know that nobody's going to do the research.
That's the problem, Valerie. You make too much sense.
Just a comment. I saw a great sign coming up through Fayette County over the weekend that said, vote the country, forget the party.
Yeah. Yep. And so to that point, what's really interesting is that I don't care how anyone's registered, because when people say, well, if I'm registered this way, can I still vote? Of course, what I mean? Okay, but like, when you look at a big state like Pennsylvania, what's fascinating is that I have more in common with my Western Pennsylvania colleagues, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, many of them, not all, than I do with some of the Republicans on the eastern side of the state, because they have totally different issues. So I don't know how you categorize whether it's Republican or Democrat, and I joke and I say to some of my more liberal friends, I said, why can't we all be politically non-binary?
Yeah, me and my wife were wondering, what's this vote early? What's the big thing about voting early? We like to go to voting early, but they keep telling you to vote early. Well, why?
I know. I think some of the arguments that were put forth on that is because that some people are out of town, and if you vote early, you can get it in, and that means that right now, first of all, we have more people voting than ever. So in particular precincts, for them to count the votes, it takes a lot of manpower. And that was the thinking behind that, is that allowing people to vote early, they kind of know how they're going to vote anyway. And some people, regardless of what the candidate does, they're just going to vote, party ticket, whatever. Yeah, I like voting on election day because you don't know what facts you might discover, or you change your mind, or you talk to your friends. But the sad part is do we really ever really 100% know what the candidates are? And it's hard. It's super hard. That's why community stuff like this is great. And I give my phone number out for people to call and to say, you know what, if you see something that you don't like, or you're not sure, or it doesn't sound like something I would do, call me. Call me. We need to do more of that. And I think that that's really the solution to all of our problems is get to know your neighbor better.
Valerie, how does local media interact with you, like Post-Gazette or KDK?
I was going to say, what local media?
Okay. But do they reach out? I know that you're indicating that they're going a different direction than you are, but what in your daily interactions with the community, with the media, what's the media doing? Are they actually working against you, or pretending you don't exist, or?
All the above.
Okay.
I mean, that's a challenge. Let me say that when I first ran in 2018 and I had an open house, and I had a gentleman walk in and he said, I didn't vote for you, but I'm looking at your bio now and I think you're going to do a pretty good job. I said, well, thank you. Thank you for coming. And I said, well, didn't you know anything about, no, I didn't know anything. I said, well, here's why. Because the media was constantly, they are picking the winners and the losers based on, and I had gone through this thing called Ready to Run, which was like a course of telling you what you need in terms of petitions and all that, and they kept on posting things like, oh well, these candidates happen to be only the Democrats. These candidates went through this Ready to Run. I was like, no, I did. And they kept on removing my name from the list, and we kept on telling them, and we have screen captures, and I actually, after I got elected, I actually talked to the lobbyist who represents that entity, and I said, hey, I'm ready to file they're a nonprofit. And I said, they kept on, removing my name from things and not giving me the same opportunities to speak before crowds. And he said, wait, well, then all of a sudden there was a bipartisan panel. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but not all. There are some decent reporters. I would say that Ford Turner is with the Post-Gazette is very fair. In fact, he's actually even read some articles in the Post-Gazette where he didn't think that the other writers did a complete job, and he goes, I'm going to come back and I want the whole story. So, I'm impressed with a couple of the writers who really, really try, but they get a lot of pressure from their editor. I mean, I had an editor once say to me, or actually a reporter, kept on coming around, and look, I'll be the first to admit, I had a business, and I still do have a business in Maryland, and reason why, I told him, I said, stop this gotcha stuff. Why don't you ask me why? Because I said, here's my quote, nobody should ever have to leave Pennsylvania to start a business. And I said, I did because they had better tax laws that were favorable, much better than Pennsylvania. So I said, that's why I'm running for office. That's your story. And so then they kind of said, so my husband was going through chemo. My husband was going through chemo at Johns Hopkins. And so I had my absentee ballot set down there while he was going through chemo. And so it was on the record that was a secondary address for me. Well, the newspaper article went, oh, her mailing address is, in another state. And I called the reporter up and I said, that's not my mailing address. Oh, well, the election office says it's your mailing address. I called up the election office and I'm like, they said, oh, it's your secondary mailing address. I called the reporter back and I go, you have a responsibility to put that it's my secondary. I don't have any problem if you tell them the truth, but stop misleading people. And I said, that was a secondary address, and tell them it was because I was going through chemo with my husband who passed away from lung cancer. So, tell the whole story, and then again, here's my quote, no one should ever have to leave Pennsylvania to start a business. They didn't, of course. And I even showed them my tax returns that you know, that it said MDNR. NR means non-resident of that other state. So it's a daily challenge. And this is where, you know, our media is not doing the job to inform people. They pick a side, and I've yelled at several reporters which again doesn't help me get better press, but you know, they've said, okay, so what you're saying is X, Y, Z. I said, I didn't say that. And I said, look, you keep asking me questions that are pushing me towards the conclusion you want. If you're going to continue to do that, then this discussion is over. Because I'm telling you a set of facts here of what I believe in, and stop asking me the same question 100 times to try to get me to answer it in a different way. So it's a challenge. I mean, it's something that we all face. And look, there's Democrat media, there's Republican media, and what's terrible is they both do it to each other. And so, you know, it's really up to us to be adults in the room. And like I said, that I like working with, I work across the aisle with anybody who helps me help my constituents. And that's my line in the sand on that. But it is a challenge.
Thank you.
Sorry for going off on that.
No, it's important, very important.
Anybody else?
For work?
I may have misunderstood you earlier about how does a legislator end up being
No, it's just, well, let's say if, you know, you're no longer, you retire from being a legislator and you, let's say, have a particular sector expertise, then there's inevitably somebody that wants to pick you up in one of the departments. I mean, you know, Governor Wolf became governor because he was actually Governor Rendell's revenue secretary. So, and prior to that, he did something else. So, frankly, Governor Wolf was I thought he was a bureaucrat,
but. This might be a philosophical question, but last year, we aborted 1.1 million Americans, and we brought in 3 million illegals. Now, George Carlin, one of my favorite, I'll clean up what he said, but he said, you know, the world is screwed. He says, just sit back and enjoy the circus. Do you ever get that way?
You should ask myself.
That's what liquor is for.
That's why I insist that I stay on the liquor committee. No, you know, I think this goes to always having a base of gratitude, and that they're always, look, no matter where you go, whether you're in business or politics, although no matter where you go, you know, there are a lot of bright, shiny people who are making a difference, and it's just incumbent on us to find those people. So yeah, there are times that, you know, you wake up and you kind of go, oh. There's just there's a lot of wrong in the world, but what I continue to wake up every morning and what I like is when I can make a difference in a really small way, even with the community, and that's why I focus on, you know, bringing the money back to the community and trying to be efficient. But yeah, there are times, there's no doubt about it. One last thing, wanted to mention, we've got a bunch of programs that we started doing first Fridays in my office from 7:30 to 9. So if you need something to be taken care of, feel free to come to the office on those dates. And then we started office hours also a couple days a week, and I have to call my office for the exact dates over at Sewickley, and we have some in Leedsdale as well. So if you need something with property tax rebate, things like that, or you need a handicap license plate, we can handle that, or just give us a call and we'll meet you down here. My staff is great, and they'll be glad to do that. And then we've got a couple of events. Oh, we'll left that up in the. We'll have it posted, but we've got. Let's see. So we have also so Saturday. On September 7th, we have a tenant toolkit. So if anyone, let's say if you got somebody that's looking landlord-tenant stuff, you want to rent, you know, apartment. We're trying to do this for the youth of how to rent an apartment. We're doing ice cream and issues over at Moon Township on September 12th. We have cybersecurity for businesses. We're going to do the Sewickley Wise Senior Expo on September 26th. We're going to work with the Y to do that. And we're also going to do an HOA forum that's also a big issue that I've been working on is homeowners associations. That's been an absolute challenge throughout the district just because they are micro governments. And there are some things that we've got some pieces of legislation to try to address on how HOAs manage just the HOA. So, but thank you so much. And
Thank you very much.